The case of Angela Craig. Angela Craig was born on April 15, 1979, in Dodge City, Kansas. She married James Tolliver Craig on December 18, 1999. They had been married for 23 years and had 6 children. Craig worked as a dentist at Summerbrook Dental Group in Aurora. On the surface, the family appeared happy, but in the years leading up to Angela's death, their relationship was strained, along with increasing financial pressures. In March 2020, Angela began suffering from severe symptoms such as dizziness, tremors, nausea, and eventually loss of consciousness. Despite being hospitalized 3 times on March 6, 9, and 15, doctors were still unable to determine the cause of her illness. Angela's condition worsened rapidly, requiring the use of life support. On March 15, Angela was admitted to the hospital for the final time, and on March 18, she was declared brain dead and passed away shortly after. The autopsy findings showed that blood concentrations of tetrahydrosaline between 1 and 2.5 micrograms per ml can cause coma or stupor, and death occurs when levels exceed 2.5 micrograms per milliliter. The concentration found in Angela's body was recorded as 1.7 micrograms per milliliter. The report also stated that ingestion of tetrahydrosaline can lead to symptoms such as hypothermia, a slow heart rate, low blood pressure, and irregular breathing. Additionally, arsenic poisoning was identified as a serious condition directly connected to Angela's death. Furthermore, the autopsy revealed that her body contained sufficient levels of cyanide and tetrahydrosaline to cause death, and therefore her death was ruled a homicide. Angela's sudden death left those around her shocked and questioning the cause of her severe health decline and abrupt passing. Angela's family expressed concerns regarding Craig's previous behavior and conduct, citing past incidents that suggested control or manipulation. They suspected that he was involved in Angela's death, which led authorities to open an official investigation into him. When police began investigating Angela's husband, Craig, they discovered that he had used the office computer to search for information such as how many grams of pure arsenic can kill, whether arsenic is detected in an autopsy, 5 types of poison that cannot be detected, and how to make poison. He had also purchased semi-crystalline arsenic from Amazon a few weeks before Angela died. Additionally, investigators found that before Angela's first hospitalization, Craig had prepared a protein shake for her before her workout. After exercising, she felt dizzy, shaky, and fatigued, so Craig took her to the hospital. However, doctors initially struggled to determine the cause. On March 9, when Angela was hospitalized for the second time, Craig ordered potassium cyanide from a company in Nebraska. In an email to the company's customer service representative, Craig introduced himself as a surgeon and stated that he intended to use potassium cyanide to research a medical method. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Craig's business partner, after learning that Angela's condition had worsened, went to the hospital and told a nurse that he believed Angela may have been poisoned. He also stated that Craig had recently ordered potassium cyanide for their dental practice. Additionally, a manager at Craig's workplace reported that on March 13th, Craig received a package at the office. When the manager opened the package, they discovered a warning label for biological waste and a round container labeled potassium cyanide inside. The manager performed a Google search and found that Angela's symptoms were consistent with potassium cyanide poisoning. Then, on March 15th, when the manager learned that Angela had been hospitalized again, she shared information about the package with another employee. Evidence against Craig included his internet search history, which showed that he had researched poisons and how to make a murder appear like a heart attack. Investigators allege Craig purchased cyanide and arsenic online, and surveillance footage showed him handling items connected to the poisoning. They believe that between March 6th and March 15th, 2023, Craig secretly poisoned his wife, Angela, with cyanide and tetrahydrosaline, a substance commonly found in eye drops. Additionally, Craig allegedly was having an affair with Kane during this period, which prosecutors believe may have been his motive. While his wife was dying in the hospital, he flew his lover, Kane, to Denver. All of these actions, along with medical evidence showing that Angela was poisoned, led to Craig's arrest on Sunday, March 19, 2023, in Aurora, Colorado. He remains in custody while the case is pending, facing charges that his intentional poisoning caused Angela's death. Craig made his first court appearance on Wednesday, July 12, 2023. The hearing focused on the proceedings related to the charges and his custody status. He is charged with first-degree murder in the death of his wife, Angela. Prosecutors presented evidence that Craig planned to kill his wife. He allegedly poisoned her by adding cyanide and tetrahydrosaline to her protein shake. He had searched online for information about poisons and had attempted to purchase arsenic and cyanide over the internet. Prosecutors allege Craig conducted these searches and planned the murder shortly after beginning an extramarital affair. The judge decided to hold Craig without bail due to the seriousness of the crime. Craig is suspected of attempted murder, being a flight risk, and posing a danger to others. The Arapahoe County medical examiner testified that Angela died from cyanide and tetrahydrosaline poisoning, a substance commonly found in over-the-counter eye drops. An Aurora Police Department detective also testified, presenting home surveillance footage that showed Craig holding bottles of drinks his wife frequently consumed and at one point holding a syringe. However, the defense team argued that the evidence was circumstantial, emphasizing that surveillance footage did not capture the poisoning. Craig's attorneys denied that he poisoned his wife's protein shake. However, Judge Shea Whitaker determined that there was sufficient evidence for the case to proceed to trial. He then attempted to make Angela's murder appear as though she had taken her own life by enlisting a former convict to plant false evidence. According to Aurora Police, Craig wrote a letter from jail to a recently released former inmate with the intention of persuading him to give false testimony. Specifically, Craig asked the individual to send fabricated suicide notes to Angela's family home, while Craig himself would write the letters from prison. Craig even offered to provide free dental treatment for the inmate's mother in exchange for assistance. However, the letter Craig sent never reached the former convict. It was returned because Craig forgot to include the former prisoner's apartment number in the address. A prison technician later retrieved the letter, opened it, and read its contents. As a result, Craig faces charges of first-degree murder, destruction of evidence, premeditated murder, and solicitation of false testimony related to his premeditated letter. Additionally, police told the court that Craig also planned to recruit attractive women to falsely testify that they had been involved in affairs with him. These relationships were intended to be staged as a reason for Angela to experience mental trauma, leading her to end her own life after discovering her husband's infidelity. Craig's attorney, Harvey Steinberg, abruptly withdrew from the case on Thursday, November 21, 2024, the same day the trial was scheduled to begin, citing professional conflicts and other reasons. As a result, Craig's trial was delayed and rescheduled for December 16, 2024. Craig now faces two additional charges: solicitation of first-degree murder and solicitation of first-degree perjury. Moving on to the next case. The case of Jennifer Ertman versus Elizabeth Pena. Jennifer Ertman was born on August 15, 1978, and Elizabeth Pena was born on June 21, 1977. They lived in Houston, Texas, and were both high school students. They had been best friends since childhood, sharing a deep bond. Elizabeth's father later remarked that Jennifer was a wonderful person, known for her positive, caring, and intelligent nature. Both girls had high expectations placed on them by their parents. They loved fashion, enjoyed jewelry and makeup, and were active, often playing basketball together. Jennifer and Elizabeth lived a vibrant teenage life filled with friends, ambitions, and dreams. They spent all their free time together, socializing with the same groups and attending the same parties. On June 24, 1993, they were on their way to a pool party at the home of their friend Gina, as they frequently did. The girls planned to meet at Elizabeth's house. Elizabeth was 16 years old, and Jennifer was 14. Jennifer's father, Randy, drove her to Elizabeth's house around 4:45 p.m. They dressed up together in preparation for the party before heading to Gina's. Elizabeth's mother drove them to the party at 8 p.m. Their curfew was 11:30 p.m. They were responsible teenagers who respected this rule and intended to be home on time that night, having promised their parents they would not be late. However, as the night went on, Jennifer and Elizabeth became so absorbed in their fun that they lost track of time. By 2 a.m., they realized they were late for curfew and rushed out of Gina's house. They had two ways to get home. The first option was to take their usual route, which went along a busy street. Although it was late, this was the safer choice, even if it took longer. The second option was to cut through the local park and walk along the train tracks, which would save them 10 to 15 minutes. At that time, cell phones were not common. The girls did not have phones, so they could not contact their families to let them know they were heading home. Additionally, people were generally less aware of crime then. Neither the girls nor their parents thought much about potential dangers. People often left their doors unlocked because they trusted one another. Without considering the risks, Elizabeth and Jennifer chose the shorter route to get home more quickly. This meant walking through dark park paths and crossing the railway embankment before reaching Elizabeth's house. Unfortunately, this choice resulted in tragic consequences. Jennifer's mother woke up around 4 a.m. and noticed that the light in her daughter's bedroom was still on, which was unusual because Jennifer always turned it off at night. Worried, she checked Jennifer's room and discovered it empty, which alarmed her even more. Not wanting to create panic, she tried calling the parents of Jennifer's best friend, Elizabeth, thinking Jennifer might have spent the night there. Unfortunately, she could not reach them. Worried about their daughter, Jennifer's parents attempted to contact Gina, where the girls had been earlier that night, hoping they might have stayed over. However, they couldn't reach her either since no one answered the phone at Gina's house. They decided to begin searching for the girls. First, they went to Elizabeth's house, but no one answered the door. Then Jennifer's father went to Gina's house and spoke with her. He was stunned to learn that the girls were not there. Gina informed him that Jennifer and Elizabeth had left her home around 2 a.m., and she had not seen them since. The man returned to Elizabeth's house and learned that her parents had not seen her since the evening. In a panic, the family called 911 to report both girls missing. In response, the police immediately began searching for the two girls because they had disappeared after dark and no one knew where they were. The possibility that the girls might have run away was never considered. All their belongings and money were still at home, and they had no reason to make such an extreme decision. Both girls came from good families. The parents acted quickly. They not only searched for their daughters, but also printed flyers with their photos to hand out across the city. Family members went through the area, asking everyone they encountered if they had seen the girls out that night. Sadly, no one had noticed anything unusual for 4 days. There was tense silence and no progress. The police received a few tips, but none of them led anywhere. The critical 48-hour window had passed despite the family's hope that their daughters would return safely. Police began to fear the worst. On the 4th day after the teenagers went missing, the police station received a disturbing call. An anonymous caller claimed that the bodies of Jennifer and Elizabeth were in a clearing in the woods behind the park where they had taken a shortcut. The police quickly arrived at the scene and began searching the area since the exact location was unclear. They crossed a railway embankment and from a distance saw suspicious shapes in a small clearing surrounded by trees. As they got closer, they were horrified to realize that the shapes were two bodies lying side by side. Both bodies were on their backs, naked, and had decomposed heavily due to the summer heat. The condition of the victims made identification extremely difficult. The ground was filled with numerous fresh footprints, suggesting that several people had been involved. There were signs of dragging and a struggle, but the police underestimated the level of brutality and the horrors the girls endured in their final moments. They reached out to the media to report the grim discovery. At that moment, Jennifer's father was giving another interview, pleading with the public for help when he overheard the devastating news. While authorities worked to identify the bodies, the grieving father rushed to the park where the crime had taken place. Overwhelmed with grief, he attempted to break through the police lines, convinced his daughter was one of the victims. Officers struggled to hold him back, as he demanded to know the hair color of the victims. However, the officers could not provide any details. The bodies were severely decomposed, making identification impossible, but they feared the victims were Jennifer and Elizabeth. All the evidence was sent to the medical examiner's office, and the bodies were examined by forensic specialists. They concluded that the deceased were 18-year-old Jennifer Ertman and 18-year-old Elizabeth Pena. The identification was confirmed through dental records, as heat and insects had caused extensive decomposition in just 4 days. Multiple footprints were discovered at the crime scene, and police determined they belonged to several individuals. The exact number was difficult to determine because the prints overlapped. A detailed autopsy revealed that both teenagers had died from strangulation. At that time, DNA testing was not widely used, and there was no database for comparison. Additionally, an anonymous witness who had helped locate the bodies appeared to possess more information that could be crucial to the investigation. The police traced the address from which the call had been made and quickly went to speak with the informant to move the investigation forward. They arrived at the home of brothers Joe and Peter Cantu, finding only Joe present. He immediately admitted that he was the anonymous caller who had contacted the police. Joe revealed that his brother Peter and 5 of his friends had violently attacked 2 schoolgirls. Officers searched the house and discovered several pieces of jewelry that clearly belonged to females. Relatives of the victims later confirmed that the jewelry belonged to Elizabeth and Jennifer. They also found traces of the girls' DNA on the items. Using Joe's information, police were able to reconstruct the events of the violent attack. Elizabeth and Jennifer were walking through the park after 2 a.m. when they were confronted by several members of the gang. The gang members ranged in age from 14 to 18, including the oldest, Jose Medellin, Derek Sean O'Brien, Efren Perez, Venancio Medellin, and the 18-year-old leader Peter Cantu, along with 17-year-old Raul Villar, who had just finished his gang initiation. The 2 girls walked quietly without stopping. Elizabeth was a few steps ahead of Jennifer as they continued toward their destination a little over a kilometer away. Suddenly, Jose Medellin emerged from the shadows. He tried to grab Elizabeth, but she quickly dodged and sped up. However, he was persistent and eventually caught her, grabbing her by the neck and dragging her toward the area where his friends were gathered. In that moment, Elizabeth was isolated in the dark park. Hearing Elizabeth's screams, Jennifer decided to help her. This was a tragic mistake because she was unable to escape and call the police in time. Jennifer ran after Elizabeth and ended up in the hands of the dangerous group. She likely underestimated the situation and did not realize that Jose was part of a gang of 6. She was seized and thrown to the ground beside Elizabeth, and then the group of attackers forced both girls to undress and assaulted them together for an hour. Forensic experts later found that the schoolgirls fought back with determination despite the terrifying circumstances. They scratched, bit, and kicked their attackers. Police later found evidence of the girls' resistance, including bite marks and scratches on the perpetrators. Tragically, their courage could not save them. After the brutal assault, the gang leader, 18-year-old Peter Cantu, decided they could not let the girls go, fearing they would identify him and report him to the police. He ordered the others to kill Elizabeth and Jennifer. One gang member, Raul, forced Jennifer to kneel. Exhausted, she obeyed, and he and Derek wrapped a red belt around her neck. They strangled her with full force until the belt snapped and she stopped moving. Unsatisfied, they continued strangling her with shoelaces to make sure she was dead. Elizabeth was forced to witness this horrific scene and understood that her own fate was sealed. Desperate, she begged her attackers to spare her, promising not to tell anyone. However, the attackers showed no mercy. The weakened and injured girl could not run far before they caught her and dragged her to the ground. They began kicking her, causing several broken ribs and knocked out teeth. After Peter, Jose, and Derek strangled her with shoelaces, they stepped on the throats of both girls to ensure they had not survived. The gang then took jewelry and money from their bodies. After the attack, the gang members, except for Derek, went to Peter Cantu's house, where his younger brother Joe and Peter's wife, Christina, were present. Christina noticed that the boys returned late at night with blood on their clothing. They appeared tired and nervous, as though they had just been in a fight. When Christina asked what had happened, the gang members claimed they had only been having some fun. However, they did not hide what they had done. Instead, they described the incident to Joe and Christina with pride, even laughing about it. Jose commented that if he had possessed a gun, things would have been easier. Joe and Christina were disturbed by the story. Still, they chose to react cautiously to avoid escalating the situation. Rather than arguing or accusing anyone, they listened closely to ensure the criminals were telling the truth. After the gang members divided the stolen items and left, Joe and Christina were finally alone. Christina expressed her anger and fear to her husband. Having been a victim of gang rape in her youth, the story deeply affected her. Christina persuaded her husband Joe that they needed to report the criminals to stop them from committing more crimes. Joe was initially hesitant because he did not want to turn his brother in to the police. He was also afraid that the gang might retaliate against them. However, Christina reassured him that he could remain anonymous when talking to the police, which would help protect them. On the fourth day after the girls disappeared, thanks to Joe's information, the bodies of the girls were found. Joe informed the police about the case, which confirmed his account. Peter had taken the victim's jewelry and other valuables, including a ring with the letter E that belonged to Elizabeth. In a misguided gesture, Jose planned to give the ring to his girlfriend, unaware of the seriousness of the situation and how inappropriate the gift was. Additionally, police found a torn red belt in the brothers' home, which matched the only weapon discovered near the victims' bodies and was identified as the murder weapon. On June 29, 1993, police arrested all 6 individuals involved in the brutal murders. When officers approached Derek, Efren attempted to escape through the back door but was swiftly captured because the house was surrounded. He was charged with double murder with aggravating circumstances. During his arrest, he asked whether his detention was related to the 2 girls, prompting officers to confirm their initial suspicion. At the police station, Derek admitted that he had given Jose the red belt used to strangle Jennifer and stated he had kept a piece of the belt for himself. Police also found DNA evidence from the murdered girls inside the house. Raul, who had joined the gang on the night of the murders, was also arrested. With overwhelming evidence, along with statements from the suspects and informants, all of them were charged with double murder, rape, and torture. During the hearing, each participant in the crime was thoroughly evaluated. The victims' families endured the painful details of the horrific attack, while seeking the maximum punishment allowed under Texas law. Jennifer's father later said that when he arrived at the crime scene and saw the girls' bodies, he noticed Derek smiling at him, waving, and then walking away. At that moment, overwhelmed with panic and shock, he did not think much of it. Only later did he understand that Derek had been taunting him about losing his only daughter. Everyone agreed on the defendant's guilt. As a result, 5 out of the 6 were sentenced to death. The only one who avoided the death penalty was Venancio Medellin. At only 14 years old, he cooperated with the investigation and testified against the other attackers, including his brother Jose. Being a minor, Venancio was convicted differently from the others, who were tried as adults. He received a 40-year prison sentence, meaning he could be released when he turns 54. At the end of the trial, another murder emerged that the accused might have committed. Authorities were alerted about dismembered remains, implicating Derek and Efren in the unsolved killing of a girl named Patricia Lopez, who had been raped and tortured to death. Patricia's body was found 6 months before the massacre of Jennifer and Elizabeth, also near the forest. The nature of her killing was similar. Police discovered that 2 attackers had savagely beaten, raped, and mutilated her before discarding her body. DNA from the victim was retrieved and examined, but the investigation initially failed to identify the perpetrators due to an absence of matches in the database. However, upon re-evaluation, male DNA recovered at the crime scene matched Jose's. Additionally, a beer can was located and Derek's fingerprint was detected on it. Despite this evidence, he was never charged with Patricia's killing. Derek later provided a recorded confession, admitting he was present during Patricia's murder, but claimed he had been too drunk to grasp the situation and insisted he did not participate in her torture. The police lacked sufficient evidence to charge him with the massacre, which was considered unnecessary given the gravity of the double murder for which he had already been sentenced to death. During the trial, much of the questioning centered on the responsibility of Raul Villarreal, who had joined the gang that night. Raul's lawyers urged the jury not to equate him with gang leader Peter Cantu in terms of responsibility. However, the defense convincingly showed that he did not take part in the madness. He was, however, present at the crime scene and did not stop anyone or walk away. This case represented a pivotal moment in the U.S. judicial system, as it was the first time defendants received death sentences for such crimes. The horrifying nature of the events drew extensive media attention and instilled fear in the local community, prompting many to avoid the area. The families of Elizabeth and Jennifer attended every trial and execution of the offenders involved. Derek, one of the defendants, was executed in July 2006. He was the only one to express remorse before his execution, apologizing to the victims' families and calling it the worst mistake of his life. Jennifer's father, Randy, remained resolute despite Derek's remorse. Many opponents of the death penalty, including prominent critics, argue that lethal injection is a cruel punishment. However, the victims' parents disagree. Randy expressed his grief after testifying about the torment his daughter endured and her tragic death. Just before Derek's execution, Randy firmly stated that he wished Derek the same pain that Jennifer had suffered. Medellin's execution also triggered international debate. As a Mexican citizen, José did not contact his consulate for protection before his trial, despite having that right under the Vienna Convention. That year, the U.S. withdrew from mandatory jurisdiction, but Mexico still filed a lawsuit against the U.S. The International Court of Justice ordered a hearing to determine whether José's lack of consular assistance had negatively affected his defense. This situation received significant media attention and involved human rights organizations, which increased its complexity. In 2005, then-President George W. Bush ordered hearings on the matter. However, the governor of Texas opposed this order and brought the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled that only the U.S. Congress possesses the authority to issue decisions in such cases. In July 2005, the International Court of Justice intervened by halting José's execution and calling for a hearing with the consulate. Despite this, the governor of Texas insisted they were not obligated to comply with the International Court's ruling. Opponents of the death penalty protested the upcoming execution. However, the victims' families maintained that lethal injection was appropriate for such a vicious crime. It was difficult to believe that the perpetrator was still imprisoned, and many wondered how the situation would unfold. He likely hoped for a pardon before his execution. On August 5, 2008, the Supreme Court rejected his final appeal. In the moments before the execution, the governor of Texas chose not to delay it, despite requests from Mexico and Washington. José Medellín was executed 2 years after Derek's death. On August 17, 2010, Peter Canta delivered a final statement before his execution. After this, the victims' parents voiced their satisfaction with the court's decision and the execution. They also hoped that the other individuals involved in the horrific crime who evaded lethal injection would spend their lives in prison while awaiting their sentences. The Supreme Court passed a law prohibiting the execution of minors, resulting in Raul Vellier receiving a life sentence with the possibility of parole in 2029. This tragedy had a deep impact on the entire Houston community. It reminded residents of the persistent issue of gang violence, similar to previous struggles. To honor the memory of Jennifer and Elizabeth, a memorial was placed at the site of the horrific initiation, and another was set up at their school. Randy believed that, regardless of age, juvenile offenders who committed such monstrous acts should never be released. Randy often spoke to the media, pledging to fight tirelessly to prevent the release of anyone involved in this brutal crime. He dedicated his life to this mission and stayed devoted to his promise. Sadly, Randy died from lung cancer in 2014 at the age of 61. His efforts greatly impacted the protection of victims' rights, prompting changes in legislation. Thanks to Randy's persistent advocacy, the families of victims were granted more rights in the courtroom. During hearings, Randy openly expressed his emotions and displayed clear hostility toward criminals. His actions attracted both support and criticism. Victims' families had previously not been permitted to speak in court to share their feelings. However, after this case, the system became more lenient. Additionally, attending the executions of murderers had been prohibited. Nevertheless, Randy succeeded in removing this restriction, and it was because of his determination that the families of the victims were present at all lethal injections. He believed this allowed the world to become slightly better. The remaining gang members in prison continued to seek parole, hoping for eventual release. Their latest request was denied. Moving on to the next case. The case of John Newberry. John Newberry was born on August 26, 1983, and grew up to be a cheerful and sociable individual with a wide circle of friends and a love for parties. During her school years, she was an active member of the local cheerleading team. After graduating high school, Johnia enrolled at East Tennessee State University to pursue a degree in psychology and criminology. It was during this time that she met Jason White, and they began dating. The couple became engaged just before graduating in late 2004. At the age of 21, Johnia chose to pursue a master's degree in psychology, which required her to temporarily relocate to Knoxville for her studies. While in Knoxville, she worked part-time at a children's educational center, where she discovered her passion for helping kids. Meanwhile, Johnia's fiancé, Jason, was studying law in another state. Despite the distance, they remained close and began planning their wedding in Knoxville. Initially, Jania stayed with her friend Jason Amami, who had also attended college with her and later moved to Knoxville. They shared a 2-bedroom apartment, and Jason allowed Jania to stay there until she found her own residence. Jania held 2 part-time jobs, one at a jewelry store and the other at a children's hospital. On the Sunday night of December 5th, after finishing her shift at the jewelry store, Jania went to the mall for some Christmas shopping. Later, she returned home and spent the evening wrapping presents for the children at the educational center, chatting with her neighbor, and then retiring to her room. Before going to bed, she had a phone conversation with her boyfriend. Around 4 in the morning, Jason Amami was awakened by a woman's scream. Initially, he thought Jania was having a nightmare, so he went to her room to check on her. However, he was shocked to find a stranger wielding a knife. The intruder attacked Jason, and they engaged in a violent struggle. Eventually, Jason managed to fend off the attacker and ran for the door. He exited the apartment and sprinted to the nearest convenience store, nearly a kilometer away, to call for help. When the store clerk saw Jason, covered in blood, they immediately called 911. Jason explained to the police what had occurred when they arrived at the scene. At the apartment, the police found Jania lying in the hallway connecting 5 units. She was still alive but barely conscious. When questioned about the attacker, she could only provide weak clues. The police searched the entire building and surrounding area, but were unable to locate the intruder. They rushed Jania to the nearest hospital, where, despite the doctor's best efforts, she could not be saved. The medical report indicated that she had suffered more than 20 stab wounds, making survival extremely unlikely. Jason had sustained 8 wounds from the attacker. Although only one was critical, he received medical care and his life was no longer in danger. Meanwhile, detectives began investigating the crime scene. They discovered blood in the hallway, suggesting that Jania had attempted to seek help from her neighbors, but none had opened their doors. Next to Jania's room, detectives found the murder weapon, a kitchen knife belonging to Jason, which the attacker had used with such force that it was bent and damaged. Police discovered blood near the back door of the apartment and on the stairs leading to the street. As Jason and Jania had exited through the front door, detectives believed the killer had likely escaped through the back door in Jason's room. Another clue was a partial footprint, possibly left by the attacker when they followed Jason and attacked him. The brutal nature of Jania's murder led police to suspect a personal motive. Initial investigations focused on Jania's boyfriend, despite him being approximately 1,000 kilometers away from Knoxville. However, friends and family testified to the strength of their relationship, and he had no apparent motive to commit such a heinous crime. He learned of Jania's death when her mother called him at 10 a.m., and he claimed to have fainted and required a long time to recover. In his incapacitated state, he needed a neighbor's assistance to book a plane ticket and pack his suitcase. After thoroughly verifying his alibi, investigators concluded that he could not have physically traveled to Knoxville and back by morning, thereby ruling him out as a suspect and shifting attention to Jania's neighbor. Unlike Jania's boyfriend, who had a solid alibi, this particular neighbor did not, raising suspicions that he might have been the perpetrator. Many of Jania's friends and family suspected him, with some believing he could have been the killer and others accusing him of leaving Jania behind while fleeing the apartment. The suspicion was so strong that Jania's parents did not even want him to attend her funeral. After Jason was released from the hospital, investigators began questioning him. He maintained his original account, stating that he had heard screams, seen an unfamiliar man, and had been attacked after successfully fending off the assailant. Jason rushed to the front door, went out into the street, and sought help from neighbors. He assumed Jania had also escaped from the apartment because he could no longer hear her screams. However, police had doubts about the accuracy of his testimony. Doubts about Jason initially arose from his injuries. Although he had 8 wounds, 7 were superficial, and the 8th on his right arm could have been sustained either while defending himself or during an altercation with someone else. Additionally, the absence of forced entry into the apartment suggested that the attacker might have already been inside. Jason claimed to have taken out the trash through the back door that night, but could not recall whether he had locked it. Detectives pressed him further, questioning which door he used to exit the apartment onto the street. Jason insisted he had left through the front door, but police suspected he was lying. If he had actually exited through the back door, it would explain the bloodstains near the door leading to the stairs, thereby heightening suspicions against him. Furthermore, police accused him of using and selling illegal drugs and of becoming aggressive when unable to get his fix. Jason denied all these allegations, but investigators continued to press various charges against him. After several hours at the station, detectives asked Jason to take a polygraph test, and to their surprise, he agreed. An expert was brought in to administer the test, during which Jason was asked a series of leading questions. When the test concluded, investigators informed him that he had failed, suggesting his responses were false. This news caused Jason to become extremely upset, shouting that he was innocent, had no involvement in the crime, that his life was in danger, and that the real perpetrator remained at large. Despite his protests, detectives remained skeptical. Police could not charge Jason due to lack of evidence. Laboratory analysis of the murder weapon revealed 3 DNA samples: the victim's, Jason's, and that of an unknown man. The unknown DNA was also found elsewhere in the apartment. A bloody fingerprint on the knife handle did not match Jason's. These findings indicated that another individual had been present, but the unknown DNA did not match any in the database. Nevertheless, public opinion continued to doubt Jason's innocence. Jason developed PTSD after a flawed polygraph test led to false accusations. In reality, he had severe lung and neck injuries with little hope of recovery. However, due to inaccuracies in police reporting, his treatment was only 25% covered, leaving him in financial distress. After the police ceased suspecting him, they began questioning Jason as a witness. Based on his account, they were able to create a rough description of the attacker. However, the situation was complicated by the fact that Jason did not get a clear view of the assailant's face. The apartment was dimly lit, and the attacker had lunged at him as soon as he left the room. In Jonia's room, investigators made an intriguing discovery. A cap was found near the back staircase, along with discs and a stereo player. Initially, they thought these items might belong to Jonia or Jason, but Jason denied any connection, claiming they were not in his apartment. This led investigators to suspect that the killer might have left the items behind. The police released a rough sketch of the suspect to the media, and after it was published, they received hundreds of tips. Many people reported individuals who vaguely resembled the sketch, prompting detectives to investigate each lead. One lead in particular drew their attention: a group of local teenagers known for breaking into houses to steal. One of these teenagers, 19-year-old Michael, bore a resemblance to the suspect's sketch. The police launched a search for Michael, complicated by the fact that he was already wanted for theft. With the possibility of his involvement in a murder, 2 police units joined the search. They tracked down Michael and brought him in for questioning about the murder. Once in custody, investigators focused on his shoes, which had a tread pattern similar to the footprint found at the crime scene. DNA and fingerprint samples were taken from Michael and sent to the lab for analysis. While awaiting results, they questioned him, and he made a surprising confession. Michael claimed that he and a friend had broken into Gia's apartment that night intending to steal valuables. He said his friend had taken a knife and attacked Gia. However, detectives soon grew suspicious of Michael's story. The details he provided did not match the evidence collected, and there was no indication that 2 strangers had been at the scene. Lab results further deepened their doubts. Michael's DNA and fingerprints did not match those found at the murder scene, and his shoes did not match the tread pattern found in Gia's room. Ultimately, police concluded that Michael had fabricated the entire story. While it may seem unusual, it is not uncommon for people to falsely confess to high-profile crimes, often seeking attention or a reward. The motivation behind Michael's confession remains unclear, but it was entirely false. Following the murder, investigators questioned over 1,000 potential suspects and collected around 400 DNA samples. None matched the evidence from the crime scene. To encourage people to come forward with information, a reward was offered early in the investigation. As time passed, the reward amount increased each month. By December 2005, a year after the murder, the reward had reached $60,000. The state governor also contributed an additional $20,000 from his own funds, attracting further public attention to the case. Despite the numerous leads, all ultimately led to dead ends. As a result, the case remained unsolved for several years. In 2007, the victim's parents took action to seek changes in state legislation. They found it surprising that the murderer's fingerprints and DNA were not in any databases, given the brutality of the crime. The parents refused to believe that this was the perpetrator's first offense. They later discovered that, according to Tennessee law, fingerprints and DNA samples were only collected from individuals who had been convicted of a crime. Jason's parents were determined to effect change. They took an active role in advocating for a new law that required DNA samples to be collected from all individuals arrested for violent offenses. Authorities supported this initiative, and the law was passed in May 2007. 2 months later, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. Police arrested 22-year-old Taylor Lee Olson for violating his probation terms. Olson had an extensive criminal record, primarily involving theft, check forgery, and auto theft, with multiple prior arrests. Remarkably, despite his history of encounters with the law, his fingerprints and DNA had never been collected. Olson lived with his girlfriend and their newborn daughter, yet his criminal activities continued. Investigators revealed that Olson had already come to their attention 5 months earlier when they received a tip suggesting his possible involvement in the murder. However, for unknown reasons, police had not pursued DNA samples for analysis at that time. With his new arrest for probation violation, they finally decided to question him regarding Jonia's case. Olson eventually confessed to his involvement in the murder and willingly provided a DNA sample. When laboratory results returned, it was confirmed that Taylor's DNA was a complete match with the sample found in the victim's apartment. Following this, his fingerprints were collected, which also matched the print on the murder weapon. Olson was subsequently arrested, and detectives began questioning him. Initially, Olson claimed he was not guilty, but he eventually confessed to his actions. Taylor stated that on the night in question, he had intended to steal Jonia's car and had entered her apartment through the back door to locate the keys. Upon entering her room, she awoke and began screaming. In response, Olson grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times. However, he insisted he had not intended to kill anyone and claimed that the events had occurred accidentally. Detectives, however, doubted some of the details and leaned toward the conclusion that Taylor had premeditated the murder. It was possible he had been stalking the victim for some time, indirectly supported by reports from Jonia's friends who stated someone had been following her in a car. No direct evidence substantiated this, but following Olson's arrest, it appeared increasingly plausible. Nevertheless, there was little doubt regarding his culpability, as his DNA and fingerprints were present on the murder weapon, strongly indicating his involvement. Olson's trial was scheduled to commence in mid-2008, by which time he had retained legal counsel. Apparently, his attorney advised him to retract his confession, and Taylor presented a revised account of events to detectives. He now claimed that he had entered Jonia's apartment with a friend named Noah Cox. According to this revised version, when Olson entered Jonia's room to retrieve the car keys, she allegedly awoke, seized a knife, and stabbed him multiple times. Olson then fled through the back door, while his friend allegedly entered the room, disarmed her, and killed her. This new narrative raised suspicion among police, as no fingerprints or DNA from other individuals were found at the crime scene, making it unlikely that anyone else had been involved. Detectives awaited the start of the trial, but it never occurred. On March 28, 2008, Taylor Olson took his own life in his prison cell. Alongside him, several suicide notes were discovered, addressed to his family, Joan, his relatives, and the police. In the note addressed to the detectives, he once again claimed that his friend Noah Cox was the actual perpetrator and also apologized to Jonia's family, as well as his own. Detectives continued to consider Olson responsible for the murder and repeatedly questioned him, but they found no evidence linking anyone else to the crime. Jonia's parents also remained skeptical, believing that Olson was not truthful. In their view, if Taylor had truly been innocent, he would not have taken his own life. It appeared far more likely that he simply did not want to spend the remainder of his life in prison. Moreover, for several months following his initial confession, Olson had consistently stated that he had entered the apartment alone and that no one else had been with him. The sudden alteration of his story to shift blame onto his friend further heightened doubts about his claims. Moving on to the next case. The case of Krista Baker Alexander. Krista Ann Baker was born on November 27, 1983, in Laurel, Jones County, Mississippi, to Pastor Winford Baker and Patty Baker. She was the youngest of 3 children, with 2 older brothers. When Krista was 8 years old, her family relocated to Obota Springs, Louisiana, where they built a church and became actively involved in its activities. Growing up, Krista traveled extensively with Christian missionary organizations to assist those in need, particularly children. She was homeschooled and later pursued a degree in Christian education through online courses at the North Tennessee Bible Institute. Krista's passion was serving others, especially children, and she hoped to start her own family one day. Her faith, however, remained her priority, and she dreamed of finding a husband who shared her values. Krista adhered to traditional principles, choosing to remain chaste and only date with the intention of finding a lifelong partner. During this period, she developed close friendships, including one with Cuddy Alexander, a fellow youth pastor who shared her commitment to missionary work. Cuddy was charismatic and well-regarded in his community. Their families met through the church and maintained a cordial relationship. Cuddy had been friends with Krista for many years before seeking her father, Winford Baker's, permission to marry her, which he happily granted. During their courtship, Cuddy and Krista observed church traditions and abstained from intimate contact. Krista even told her parents that she wanted to save her first kiss with Cuddy for their wedding day. While Krista assisted her parents at church, Cuddy pursued a career as a paramedic. A year later, they decided to marry. On March 1, 2008, they exchanged vows in the presence of family and church members. The wedding was a joyous celebration, and Krista was radiant as a bride. However, their happiness was tragically short-lived. Just 4 months after the wedding, on June 29, 2008, Cuddy returned home from a night shift at around 6 a.m. to find Krista lying face down on the floor. She was dead. Cuddy immediately called the police. Krista's body was found near the front door with no signs of a struggle. A gunshot wound was discovered in the back of her head, with burn marks on her skin indicating that the shot was fired at close range. The wound suggested that the gun had been positioned at the back of Krista's head when fired. A 9mm shell casing was found on the floor next to her body. Initially, investigators considered the possibility of a botched robbery. It appeared that someone might have broken into the house, assuming it was empty, and then killed Krista to eliminate a witness. Police conducted a thorough search of the home. A jewelry box was found on the bed, the gun cabinet had been forced open, and Krista's purse lay on the kitchen table, showing signs of being rummaged through. Many drawers and cabinets were left open, indicating the perpetrator had been searching for valuables. After completing the search, police began interviewing individuals with access to the property. Krista's husband, Cuddy Alexander, was the first to be questioned. However, he was too distraught to respond immediately, and investigators waited for him to compose himself. Once able to speak, Cuddy stated that everything had seemed normal the previous night before he left for his overnight shift as an emergency medical technician with Kedon Ambulance. He explained that he had called Krista multiple times throughout the night, but she did not answer, and he had sent several text messages, all of which went unanswered. Assuming Krista had simply fallen asleep after being tired, Cuddy did not think much of it. However, when he returned home the following morning, he was confronted with a disturbing scene. The front door was slightly ajar, and upon entering, he found their belongings scattered throughout the house and Krista lying on the floor with a fatal gunshot wound to the head. He immediately checked her pulse and confirmed that she was dead. Overcome with panic, he called 911 without delay. Investigators were tasked with determining who could have entered the house while Cuddy was at work. It was possible that the perpetrator waited until Krista was alone before attacking. They also considered the possibility that Krista may have let the assailant inside voluntarily, as there were no signs of a struggle either on her body or within the house. This suggested that she might have known her attacker and did not feel threatened until it was too late. Cuddy informed investigators that a rifle and a shotgun were missing from the gun cabinet. Adding to the tragedy, Krista was 17 weeks pregnant, meaning the attack claimed not only her life, but also that of their unborn child. Cuddy was overwhelmed with grief, struggling to comprehend the loss and unsure how to continue his life. The case now involved 2 victims. The crime scene itself appeared unusual to investigators. While the house was messy, it did not resemble a typical burglary. Cabinets and drawers were open, yet there was no evidence that the perpetrator had been searching for specific items. It seemed as though the scene had been deliberately staged to mislead the police. The jewelry box was open, but its contents remained intact, and Krista's purse was open with all valuables untouched. Investigators also noted that although 2 firearms were missing, other firearms in the house had not been taken, which was suspicious. Based on these observations, they concluded that the scene had been staged to make Krista's murder appear as a robbery. To gather further information, police began interviewing neighbors, which led to an unexpected lead. Mathis Rabel, the 69-year-old neighbor and landlord of the Alexanders, described them as a quiet, recently married couple who were active members of the Fundamental Baptist Church. Mathis recalled Krista as kind and helpful, rarely seen outside without her husband. He last saw the couple on Saturday afternoon when Cuddy was collecting turtles he had shot in his backyard pond. This led investigators to learn that Cuddy owned the gun. However, when police searched the Alexander home, they did not find a gun. Cuddy claimed that only a rifle and a shotgun had been stolen, never mentioning a handgun. Detectives suspected Cuddy might be hiding something. During a search of the pond area, they discovered several 9mm shell casings in the grass. These casings were similar to the one found near Krista's body. The police sent the casings to the state crime lab for analysis, and the lab report confirmed that the gun Cuddy used to shoot the turtles was the same firearm used to shoot Krista. Investigators summoned Cuddy to the police station for further questioning regarding his wife's death. He maintained that it was impossible for him to have committed the crime, stating that he had left for work at 5 p.m. on Saturday, June 28, 2008, and returned home the next morning at 6 a.m., providing an alibi that he had been working throughout the night. Upon verification, Cuddy's colleagues confirmed his statement, asserting that he had indeed been at work throughout the entire night. When asked about the firearm, Cuddy stated that he owned a gun, but insisted he had sold it the day before the incident to an unidentified man named Steve. The purported buyer had paid $500 in cash, which complicated efforts to verify the claim. Cuddy described Steve as a white male in his mid-30s, approximately 6 feet 1 inch tall, driving an old Toyota pickup truck. Krista's parents expressed their doubts to investigators, asserting that they did not believe Cuddy's version of events. Her father, Winfred Baker, remarked that Cuddy displayed minimal emotional reaction to Krista's death, a behavior that had emerged a few months prior to their wedding. They had been facing financial difficulties since moving in together, and the imminent arrival of their child was likely to exacerbate their struggles. Krista's parents also suspected that Cuddy was having an affair with a co-worker who had even attended their wedding. Krista had confided in friends just weeks before her death that she believed Cuddy was being unfaithful. As investigators examined the marriage more closely, they became increasingly convinced that Cuddy and Krista held conflicting visions for their future. However, did this provide sufficient motive for Cuddy to take Krista's life, particularly given that she was carrying their unborn child? Police had a single lead, a man named Steve, who Cuddy claimed had purchased the gun used to kill Krista. Investigators attempted to locate Steve using the description Cuddy had provided. Meanwhile, they summoned Cuddy for additional questioning, asking him to recount his activities before, during, and after work on the day of Krista's death in detail. This time, his account diverged from his original statement. Investigators identified multiple inconsistencies in Cuddy's narrative. He omitted any mention of a man named Steve, who was allegedly at his residence and to whom he had sold a firearm. Additionally, while on duty, Cuddy exhibited no concern for his pregnant wife Krista's safety when she failed to answer his calls, despite knowing she was alone at home. He could have requested that a family member check on her, but he did not. Moreover, the crime scene appeared staged, which intensified suspicions regarding Cuddy's involvement. As investigators increased pressure, Cuddy's account began to collapse. Following several hours of interrogation, he altered his story completely. He claimed that he had been sleeping on the couch prior to his night shift, and that his wife had awakened him late. He stated he was not upset with her for waking him late, and that it had not been a problem. Cuddy then asserted that he had been walking around the house with a gun, intending to bring it to work because a colleague was interested in buying it. He claimed he was merely fooling around, aiming the gun at objects and making click-click noises. He approached Krista from behind, placed the gun at the back of her head, and said that an accidental discharge had occurred. He insisted it was unintentional and that he had no desire to harm her. Upon realizing Krista was dead, he became frightened and unsure of how to respond. Cuddy Alexander admitted to staging the scene to resemble a robbery. He removed several items from his home, including weapons and a DVD player, and left for work with the front door open. His plan was for someone to discover the open door with lights on and subsequently find his wife Krista while he was at work. However, this scheme failed. On his way to work, Alexander discarded a pistol and other items, including his wife's jewelry, out of the car window. By the time he reached work, the only possessions remaining in the car were a DVD player and a Sony radio. He gave the DVD player to a colleague, Allison Sharp, with whom he had been engaged in an affair. Alexander and Sharp had kissed and held hands before and after his wedding, spending one night together at a Baton Rouge hotel. While his wife Krista attended church camp, he took Sharp to a hotel for a jacuzzi evening with fine china plates, a meal, and wine, despite supposed financial difficulties, earning only $11 per hour and facing stalled professional certification efforts. Cootie and his pregnant wife, Krista, were experiencing financial struggles and unemployment, and to make matters worse, their washing machine had broken. Yet Alexander managed to arrange funds for a romantic evening at Callaway Inn with his mistress, Sharp. Police later discovered that a shocking event had occurred in the home, contradicting Cootie's initial claim that Krista's death had been accidental. Detectives found proving direct involvement difficult, but they considered Cootie's explanation suspicious. Despite these obstacles, police were convinced that Krista's death was not an accident and that Cootie's actions raised more questions than they answered. Following Cootie Alexander's arrest, Krista's parents found the strength to forgive him. The Baker family united to mourn the loss of their cherished daughter and what would have been their fourth grandchild. Krista's father, Winfred Baker, remembered her affectionately, describing her as a sweet and lovely person. Krista had made a meaningful impact on those around her, completing 17 mission trips during her life. Winfred Baker recalled a conversation with Cootie shortly before his arrest. Although brief, Baker described the encounter as emotional, saying they hugged and cried together. Despite his desire for justice, Baker stated he had already forgiven Cootie. "We forgave him even before we knew who was responsible," he said. Baker found solace in knowing Krista was now in a better place, saying, "She's with the Lord in heaven and at peace." The trial commenced on August 2, 2009. Prosecutors argued that Cootie's conduct following Krista's death indicated intentional action. They questioned why he did not call 911 immediately if the shooting had truly been accidental. Instead, Cootie staged a robbery and left Krista's body for 12 hours before returning home and calling 911. Prosecutors also challenged Cootie's claim that the shooting was accidental, noting he was an experienced gun owner who had received proper training from his father. Cootie Alexander, 24, was charged with second-degree murder for his wife's death. Cootie had admitted involvement in Krista's death, attributing it to poor decision-making. After initially proceeding to trial, Cootie unexpectedly changed his plea to guilty, ending jury deliberations. This sudden development occurred after Krista's family agreed to an earlier proposed plea deal. Alexander was sentenced to 55 years in prison in August 2009. Moving on to the next case. The case of Lee Matthews. Lee Matthews was born in 1983 to Rob and Sharon Matthews. Rob was the head of a specialized IT technology company and a well-known businessman in South Africa. In 1999, he started working with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, one of the largest stock exchanges in the world and a major IT organization in South Africa. Lee shared a close bond with both of her parents, especially her mother. They spent time together doing activities such as going to the gym, visiting beauty salons, and shopping. They particularly enjoyed scrapbooking and liked creating and designing photo albums. Lee was a caring and sensitive person. After the tragic Columbine massacre, she joined her classmates in sending aid to the victims, demonstrating her compassionate nature. During high school, Lee volunteered at an animal cruelty prevention center, further showing her kindness. Friends described her as quiet and unassuming, often joking about her shyness and how easily she would blush. After graduating, Lee decided to pursue a career in finance, inspired by her father's work. On July 9, 2004, Lee attended classes at the university. She had just turned 21 the day before, on July 8th, and celebrated with a dinner at a restaurant with her family and close friends. At the end of the meal, the entire restaurant sang happy birthday to her, which embarrassed her so much that she chose to leave the restaurant. The following day, a birthday party was planned, and after agreeing to meet friends at a club, she went to the university parking lot. Sadly, no one saw her again after that. Around noon, Lee's father, Rob Matthews, received a call from her phone. However, it was not Lee on the line. Instead, a man claimed he had kidnapped her. He told Rob not to contact the police and demanded a ransom of 350,000 South African rand, about $20,000. The kidnapper named a location south of Johannesburg for delivering the ransom. Rob believed the caller was serious and said that he had successfully committed similar crimes before. Rob noticed a slight accent and believed the kidnapper was from the area. The kidnapper threatened to kill Lee if the ransom was not paid. At one point, the kidnapper handed the phone to Lee, and Rob heard her crying as she begged her father to meet the kidnapper's demands. The call then ended suddenly. Desperate to save their daughter, Rob and Sharon chose to comply. They brought the money to the specified location and waited for more instructions. Unfortunately, every attempt to call Lee's phone resulted in a message asking them to leave a voicemail. Her phone was switched off, leaving them cut off from both their daughter and the kidnapper and feeling completely hopeless. They decided to contact the police. A dedicated team was assembled to locate Lee and ensure her safe return while apprehending the kidnapper. Investigators pointed out that wealthy individuals like Rob are frequently targeted for kidnappings in South Africa. Detectives released a photograph of Lee and described her clothing at the time of her abduction: blue jeans, a red top, and a black leather jacket. Sharon made an emotional appeal to the kidnapper on national television, asking him to release Lee and tell them where they could find her. She expressed how desperately she wanted her daughter back to resume her normal life, stressing the importance of allowing her to complete her studies and begin a career. She pleaded with him to bring Lee back. Friends and family were extremely concerned about Lee's safe return home. Her best friend, Giselle Clemson, said that they focused on searching for Lee to cope with their anxiety and uncertainty. A website was established to gather information regarding the kidnapping. The Matthews family offered a reward for any details that could help locate Lee, while investigators enlisted cell phone technology experts to attempt to track her phone. As days passed, Lee's parents grew increasingly desperate. They spent hours searching the streets for their daughter. In their distress, Sharon consulted a psychic who claimed she could see something and directed police to an area outside Johannesburg. However, she later stated that she could no longer see anything. Rob and Sharon considered the possibility that the kidnapping might be connected to Rob's work activities. Detectives advised Rob to cease engaging with the media to help reduce tensions. Meanwhile, there were growing concerns that the crime could inspire other criminals to commit similar kidnappings. The negotiating team observed that kidnappings are relatively common in southern Africa, occurring roughly once a month. In South Africa, such incidents often resemble business transactions, with abductors seeking rapid financial gain from their victims. While exact statistics are withheld for security reasons, the reported number of kidnappings is quite high. On average, kidnappings in South Africa last about 21 days, with most victims eventually returning home safely after ransom payments are made. Investigators noted that the kidnapper had targeted the victim in advance, monitoring her movements and choosing the appropriate time to abduct her. The Matthews family remained hopeful that Lee would return safely and believed the kidnapper would contact them regarding the ransom soon. On July 21, 2004, a street sweeper in Grasmere Square discovered the naked body of a young girl. He immediately notified the police, who identified the victim as Lee Matthews. Her body had 3 gunshot wounds and was found bound. The area was quickly cordoned off by police, and over 50 officers, including forensic teams, began investigating the crime scene. The medical examiner determined that Lee had been killed approximately 4 or 5 days before her body was found, which was a week after her family had paid part of the ransom. Shortly thereafter, speculation emerged in the community that she was murdered because her family could not pay the full ransom. However, police dismissed these rumors. The entire nation of South Africa became involved in the search for information about the killer. The case, initially classified as a kidnapping, was updated to a murder investigation, and a manhunt for the perpetrator commenced. The South African police compiled a report based on over 100 interviews and leads. Last month, investigators reached out to other kidnapping victims who had paid ransoms, seeking their assistance in the investigation. Recent autopsy results provided new insights into the murder. Investigators suspect that Lee's body was frozen for several days before her murder scene was staged in the square, suggesting she had been killed elsewhere. Additionally, It was determined that different parts of Lee's body were decomposing at varying rates, indicating that some parts had been frozen in a large container of ice. The criminal group's actions were described as a calculated attempt to mislead the police. Forensic scientists discovered a group of bullets near Lee's body, but later confirmed that these bullets did not correspond to the crime scene. There were no developments in the case until early October, when a suspect was apprehended. The suspect, 24-year-old Donovan Moodley, was a student at the same university as Lee. Before his arrest, Donovan confessed the murder to several friends, and one of them reported this to the police. Donovan's fingerprint matched one found on the tape used to bind Lee's hands, and his phone was tracked alongside Lee's after the kidnapping. After Donovan's arrest, additional details about the case emerged. Initially, it was reported that Lee's family did not contact the police until they lost contact with the kidnapper. However, this was incorrect. They had contacted the police immediately, and officers accompanied them to meet the kidnapper, who was hiding in Lee's father Rob's car. Just minutes before the ransom exchange was to occur, the kidnapper unexpectedly changed the meeting location because he felt the risk of being seen by a police officer was too high, and he left the car. In July of the following year, Donovan pleaded guilty to 3 charges related to Lee's murder. He entered this plea shortly before the trial was scheduled to begin. In the Johannesburg High Court, his lawyer read chilling statements regarding the kidnapping and murder of Lee. The lawyer stated that Donovan killed Lee because he could not find a way to release her without being followed. Donovan admitted that he had been planning to kidnap girls for over a week, targeting those he believed came from wealthy families and would likely pay a ransom. He did not specifically select Lee. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time while he was searching for a victim. Despite coming from a good family, Donovan was motivated by greed. The defendant, Donovan, stated that he approached Lee in the university parking lot that night and asked her for a ride. He then pulled out a gun, forced her to lie on the floor of his car, tied her up, taped her mouth shut, and placed a balaclava over her head. Donovan explained that he became concerned about police checkpoints and realized he had no escape. He understood that he could not release her without facing consequences, so he decided to kill her. He ordered her to strip naked before shooting her in the back of the head. Afterward, he shot her 3 more times to ensure she was dead, using special bullets designed to explode on impact to cause maximum damage. After the murder, Donovan acted as if nothing had occurred. He gave a ring to his girlfriend and proposed to her, and he even participated in a volleyball tournament. He was later charged with kidnapping and murder. In court, during his confession, Donovan described his actions as disgusting. He admitted to holding her captive for several days before killing her. Following Donovan's confession, the prosecutor was permitted to present witnesses to demonstrate that Donovan had not fully disclosed all his crimes, seeking the harshest possible sentence. The prosecutor emphasized that Donovan claimed he shot Lee at the location where her body was discovered, but they argued this was false. Forensic evidence indicated that the body had been stored in a freezer for several days before being moved to the square. The prosecution also suspected that Donovan may have had an accomplice, and he did not reveal where he had kept Lee or what he had done to her. The medical examiner noted that the condition of Lee's fingers and toes suggested her body had been in contact with the surfaces of a refrigerator or freezer. Additionally, tissue marks on other parts of her body could have resulted from being wrapped in a blanket. The examiner pointed out that rigor mortis suggested her body had been kept cool and that only 400 milliliters of blood remained in her body. This suggested that she had been murdered and that her blood had been drained elsewhere, as no blood was discovered at the crime scene. Additionally, the absence of maggots indicated that her body had not been left at the location for long and had likely been frozen. It was revealed that Donovan had called his girlfriend near the crime scene, and his phone was also found close to that location. Further evidence against him included a 9mm pistol in his possession, which matched the weapon used in the murder. During the trial, Lee's father described Donovan as a manipulative coward who did not deserve to live. He emphasized that Donovan's ability to continue his normal life after the murder demonstrated his ruthlessness. Throughout the trial, Donovan showed no emotion until his father, Stephen, was called to testify. Stephen said he had been proud of his son's job promotions, but that pride vanished in light of the crime. He stated that his son had committed a brutal act and did not deserve forgiveness. Stephen mentioned that Donovan never requested money from the family, as they were financially stable, which confused him about why his son had acted as he did. He expressed sympathy for the Lee family, saying they were ashamed to be connected to such a horrific crime and that they accepted responsibility because Donovan was their son and always would be. He added that they could never relieve the pain caused and prayed that the Lee family could forgive his son. These words brought Donovan to tears. Donovan had faced many emotional difficulties throughout his life. In 2001, Donovan's grandfather was fatally stabbed by his uncle, who was not convicted of murder. Instead of serving time, the uncle was sent to a psychiatric hospital. The prosecution sought a life sentence for him, while Donovan's lawyer argued that the uncle felt deep remorse for his actions and did not merit a lighter sentence. The lawyer also stated that the uncle had only pleaded guilty due to the overwhelming evidence against him. Ultimately, the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment for murder, equivalent to 25 years, with an additional 15 years for kidnapping and 10 years for extortion. During sentencing, the judge described Donovan's crime as extremely brutal, stating that it had destroyed his own life and devastated his family's lives. The sentence given to him was among the harshest in South Africa. Following the trial, investigators announced plans to examine whether anyone else had been involved in the murder, suspecting that Donovan might have had an accomplice. Investigators noted that certain aspects of the case required further investigation due to inconsistencies. A few months after his guilty verdict, Donovan notified the Johannesburg High Court of his intention to seek a retrial, claiming he had been framed. In October 2009, he submitted documents to the Supreme Court of Appeal, arguing that he should not spend the remainder of his life in prison because he had not intended to kill. He also claimed that the judge who sentenced him was biased due to the media coverage surrounding the case. In interviews, Donovan argued that the incident constituted manslaughter rather than murder, and he believed he deserved a lighter sentence. He described the life sentences he received as shockingly inappropriate. His new lawyer supported this view, stating that the prosecution had failed to prove the murder was premeditated. Ultimately, the court denied Donovan's motion, and his conviction was upheld. He remained silent for a period until July 2011, when he appealed to the Supreme Court for a retrial. In his appeal, he claimed that 3 drug dealers named Frank A. Lee and Jumbo had coerced him into participating in the kidnapping by threatening to harm his family, which he cited as the motive for the crime. Donovan stated that the plan had changed and that they intended to kidnap someone else. He was instructed to wait in the car for Lee to come down the stairs. However, Lee followed Lee to the car and grabbed her. She was not their original target, but they decided to abduct her when they spotted her in the university parking lot. Donovan said he was directed to go with Frank to dispose of Lee's car near the campus. They were then to meet Lee and Jumbo. Frank used Lee's phone to call Rob and demanded a ransom. After the money was delivered, Donovan said he was forced to witness Jumbo shoot Lee. He expressed fear that the drug dealers would kill him and pleaded for his life. Allegedly, Jumbo placed Donovan's clothes in his car and instructed him to dispose of a body at home, which resulted in his fingerprints being found on the tape used to bind Lee. Donovan claimed he was so confused that he never reported Frank A. Lee and Jumbo to the police. He accused investigators of fabricating evidence against him and turning the media against him. Ironically, during his last appeal, Donovan confessed to the murder. His petition was denied, but he filed again the following year. In this appeal, Donovan compared himself to Jesus Christ on the cross, portrayed himself as a victim of circumstances, and complained about being denied legal assistance. He insisted that his confession was false and coerced, but this appeal was also rejected. The kidnapping and murder of Lee Matthews deeply saddened people throughout South Africa. Unfortunately, Donovan's trial did not ease the suffering of Lee's parents. During the intense trial, Lee's mother stated that Donovan had shattered their family with his actions. She shared that every night before going to bed, they still visit Lee's room, wishing to find her there, unharmed, smiling, safe, and at home. Moving on to the next case. The case of Leilani Simon. Leilani Simon resides with her 20-month-old son, Quinton, and her boyfriend in a home in Savannah, Georgia, United States. On the morning of October 5, 2022, she called 911 to report that her son, Quinton, had gone missing from his playpen. She first asserted that her son had been abducted. Police started questioning Simon, Quinton's mother, who was the last individual to see the child before he vanished. During questioning, She provided inconsistent accounts, particularly regarding what she did the night before and the morning of Quinton's disappearance. Surveillance cameras near Simon's residence captured activity that did not align with her statements on the day of the incident. Additionally, cell phone data revealed that she had traveled to an area near a local landfill shortly after Quinton was reported missing. Suspecting Simon's involvement in Quinton's disappearance, police chose to investigate her further. They interviewed relatives and neighbors to gain more insight into the relationship between her and Quinton. Quinton's grandparents stated that she had been neglectful and abusive toward her son. These accounts raised concerns about the boy's safety while living with his mother. Simon's friends also disclosed additional details about her family issues, including her failure to provide proper care for her son. A key witness in the case was Quinton's babysitter. She testified that Simon frequently failed to give enough attention or care to the boy. She described unusual behavior, including Simon being cold and indifferent toward the child. The babysitter also said she witnessed Simon pushing the boy into the pool and not assisting him when he was hurt. These statements played a significant role in establishing Simon's abusive behavior toward her son. While the search for Quinton continued, Simon was seen drinking at a bar with her mother, Billie Jo Howell. This behavior caused public outrage, as it did not match the image of a mother desperately searching for her missing child. Based on these factors, on October 12, 2022, police identified Simon as the primary suspect. However, they did not arrest her immediately and continued gathering additional evidence to clarify the case. Investigators began searching the house where Quinton lived before he disappeared. They found no evidence of forced entry or violence, so they ruled out the possibility that the boy had been taken by a stranger. They then discovered traces of organic material and an unusual odor in the family's trash, which prompted them to broaden the search to a nearby landfill. After many days of searching the surrounding landfills, they still were unable to locate any trace of the boy. Investigators uncovered a new lead in the case when they collected footage from surveillance cameras near Simon's home. They examined her movements and determined that trash from a dumpster near her residence was being transported to a landfill in Chatham County, Georgia. They promptly began searching the landfill, suspecting that Quinton's body could be located there. Approximately 40 officers from multiple agencies, including the FBI and local police, along with forensic specialists and technicians, took part in the search. They examined the dump for over a month, but the task was challenging because of the massive volume of trash and its compacted condition, making the search for the body extremely complex. Quinton's body had been in the landfill for an extended period, creating a serious risk of decomposition and making it difficult to identify evidence. This situation created significant pressure, forcing the search team to move quickly. After more than a month of searching, on November 18, 2022, the search team discovered human remains at the landfill. The remains were sent to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, for examination. There, scientists confirmed that the remains belonged to Quinton. Shortly afterward, on November 21, 2022, Simon was arrested in Chatham County, Georgia. The arrest occurred after an extensive investigation and once authorities had gathered sufficient evidence against her. She was later indicted by a grand jury in Chatham County, Georgia, on December 14, 2022. She faces 19 charges, including malice murder, 2 counts of aggravated murder, concealment of another person's death, and multiple counts of making false statements. These charges are directly connected to the death of her son, Quinton. According to the investigation, Simon became angry and beat her son Quinton to death. This action may be linked to her drug use. She then concealed the body in a trash can and fabricated a story about the boy's disappearance to mislead the police. A preliminary hearing was held on October 9, 2024, with numerous witnesses providing testimony. The babysitter testified that Simon had abused Quinton, including pushing him into the pool and failing to assist him when he was injured. Several family members also testified that Simon was irresponsible and abusive toward her son. Evidence, including the babysitter's testimony and the discovery of Quinton's body in the dumpster, supported the prosecution's claim that Simon murdered her son. After reviewing the evidence and witness testimony, the jury found Simon guilty on all 19 charges related to the death of her son, Quinton. The charges included 2 counts of murder, concealing a death, and making false statements. However, the defense argued that the case was based on hearsay and speculation, and that the evidence was insufficient to support a murder conviction. As the trial neared its conclusion, Simon's attorneys asked the judge to declare that there was insufficient evidence for a jury to convict her of murder and concealing Quinton's death. They requested that the judge issue a direct verdict of acquittal on those charges. The judge denied the motion. Simon's trial took place on November 21, 2024, in Chatham County Superior Court. During the trial, prosecutors stressed that Simon showed no remorse. She only expressed regret about being arrested and having to face trial. Throughout the proceedings, she also failed to offer a clear explanation to justify her actions and was unable to challenge the evidence presented in court. Under Georgia law, murder carries a life sentence. Because prosecutors did not pursue the death penalty, Judge Tammy Stokes only needed to determine whether to allow Simon the possibility of parole. As a result, Simon was sentenced to life in prison, but may be eligible for parole after serving 30 years. In addition, the judge imposed an extra 10 years in prison for concealing Quinton's death. She has the right to appeal the sentence within 30 days of sentencing. When she heard the verdict, she simply stood up and nodded as if she accepted it. She said nothing. After Simon was sentenced to life in prison, her defense team filed an appeal requesting a new trial, stating that during Simon's trial, the prosecution did not present any forensic evidence explaining how Quinton died. The trial drew significant attention, with many witnesses such as neighbors and family members coming forward to condemn Simon's violent behavior toward her son Quinton. The Simon case is not only a crime story, but also a reminder of the importance of protecting and caring for children to prevent similar tragedies from occurring within families. Moving on to the next case. The case of Liz Quackenbush. Elizabeth Harper Quackenbush, also known as Liz Quackenbush, was born on June 7, 1981, in Concord, California. Quackenbush worked as a teacher at Harmony High School in Bayou St. John, Louisiana. She graduated from Augsburg College in Minneapolis. She was an exceptional educator. Her work has been recorded by the nationally recognized nonprofit StoryCorps in Rochester. Elizabeth co-founded the Rochester ALC's Green Thumb Initiative. She worked relentlessly to help the students in her classroom create a meaningful impact on the world where they live. At New Harmony High School, she was cherished and respected by her students. On a tragic day, a man who presented himself as the uncle of Preston Higgs, Elizabeth's boyfriend, contacted the police to report the murder. The man stated that Higgs had struck his girlfriend with an axe, that she was dead, and that the incident had taken place the previous day. On Wednesday, March 3, 2021, Elizabeth, 39, was discovered dead from an axe wound to her head and right hand at her residence in the St. Claude neighborhood of New Orleans. The caller also directed police to the murder weapon inside the home. Investigators found no indication of forced entry, implying that the attacker was someone she knew and trusted. The belongings in the house showed no evidence of major disruption, suggesting that this was not a murder committed for theft. Furthermore, home surveillance footage revealed no one except Higgs entering or leaving the home at the time of Elizabeth's death. Higgs left his residence shortly after 5 p.m. that same day and drove away, and leaving the scene immediately further showed police that this was clearly a deliberate escape. 2 days later, authorities released a statement identifying her longtime boyfriend, Higgs, as the suspect in the murder. Through the investigation, detectives with the New Orleans Police Department's homicide unit identified Higgs as the offender in the case and secured an arrest warrant for second-degree murder. By then, Higgs had already left the state, forcing authorities to broaden the search. On March 14th, Higgs' cell phone was discovered in the bed of a pickup truck in rural Iowa. Sometime after that, in May, Higgs's vehicle was located in Chicago. The U.S. Marshals Service, which helped with the investigation, believed Higgs had traveled through Rochester, Minnesota, the place where he and Elizabeth grew up, after an 18-week nationwide manhunt led by the U.S. Marshals Service. Authorities eventually located Higgs on a Greyhound bus in Indiana, where he was arrested and detained before being extradited to Louisiana, carrying a fake ID and a disposable phone in his pocket. He was returned to face trial in Louisiana. The Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office, including District Attorney Jason Williams and Assistant District Attorney Penny Kissinger, was present as the jury announced its long-awaited verdict. After years of postponements caused by legal complications, time spent assembling evidence, and an extensive manhunt after Higgs fled the crime scene, His trial is scheduled to begin in 2024. The delay has not only deeply affected Liz's family, but also left the community unsettled because the suspect had not yet been brought to justice. During the 3-day trial in August 2024, the prosecution presented its case using the substantial evidence collected throughout the investigation, including Higgs's uncle's confession, the murder weapon, the surveillance footage, and the brutal nature of the crime. The trial carried intense emotion as witnesses, including Elizabeth's family, described the immense impact of her loss. The prosecution stressed the savagery of the crime, pointing out that Elizabeth's head injuries were severe and demonstrated a deliberate attack. In his closing arguments, Orleans Parish Attorney Jason Williams portrayed Elizabeth's final moments as filled with terror. He explained that Elizabeth tried to flee from her attacker, retreating as far as she could within her home. She was ultimately cornered in the place where she died, which has been referred to as her final resting spot. This depiction highlights the violent and horrific nature of the murder and emphasizes the despair the victim experienced. The prosecution's narrative was meant to underline the seriousness of the crime and Higgs's involvement in committing an indefensible act. Such statements in court not only illustrated the extent of Elizabeth's suffering, but also played a significant role in persuading the jury of the gravity of the case, resulting in Higgs's severe sentence. Higgs's defense attorney, in contrast, had difficulty producing a credible counterargument due to the overwhelming evidence against Higgs. After 3 days of trial and compelling arguments from the prosecution, the jury swiftly reached its final decision. Higgs was found guilty of second-degree murder. Higgs is set to receive his final sentence on October 3, 2024. As planned in the earlier court session, during the sentencing hearing, Elizabeth's family delivered powerful statements about the profound influence she had on their lives and the immense loss they have endured. The victim's brother, Michael Quackenbush, spoke about the emptiness left by her death, and her mother, Diane Holland, expressed her anguish at having to outlive her child. These emotional accounts underscored the widespread consequences of Higgs's actions. Higgs was allowed to speak at the hearing, where he voiced regret and asked for forgiveness. However, the judge condemned his failure to offer a sincere apology and characterized his actions as brutal and needless. This lack of genuine remorse was noted as an important factor in the emotional reaction within the courtroom. At last, the judge delivered the ruling. Preston Higgs was formally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after being convicted of the second-degree murder of Elizabeth Quackenbush. The sentence was issued in Orleans Parish Criminal District Court, overseen by Judge Rona Good Douglas. Life imprisonment is the mandatory punishment under Louisiana law for second-degree murder. The life sentence formally concluded a case that had deeply affected the New Orleans community, drawing focus to matters such as domestic violence and the devastating effects of such acts. The trial not only provided justice for Elizabeth, but also acted as a reminder of the importance of increasing awareness and preventing domestic violence. The case continues to resonate, particularly for the insight it offers into how violence can manifest in real life. The sentence was regarded as an appropriate punishment and delivered justice to Elizabeth's family and community, who had waited more than 3 years for the truth to come to light. Moving on to the next case. The case of Madison Sparrow. Madison Elizabeth Sparrow was born on September 12, 2003, in Norfolk, Virginia, to Heather Sparrow Murphy and Richard Prestige. She has 2 older sisters, Molly and Wendelin. Wendelin, born in 1999 in Durango, Colorado, is from Richard's previous relationship. The family eventually settled in Newark, Delaware. Madison's younger sister, Molly, was born on October 5, 2010, and the 2 sisters became close. As the eldest, Madison has a natural talent for caring for children and takes her role seriously. She enjoys spending time with her cousins, often performing comedic acts and making people laugh. Her bubbly personality and cheerful demeanor make her a joy to be around. However, her father notes that she also has a more introverted side, often becoming pensive and lost in thought. From a young age, Madison demonstrated wisdom beyond her years, carefully observing situations before reacting. Friends and family valued Madison's loyalty and caring nature, often seeking comfort in her warm embrace. Madison had a strong passion for learning and exploring new experiences. This curiosity led her to join the Girl Scouts, a global organization empowering girls to develop life skills. When Madison joined the Girl Scouts at age 9, she assumed the role of troop leader. Over nearly 10 years with the Girl Scouts, Madison earned numerous badges for her accomplishments and built lasting friendships. As she matured, Madison's connection to the principles of Girl Scouting deepened. She volunteered to assist her sister Molly's troop and remained committed to helping others and upholding the organization's values. Madison frequently socialized with her friends, engaging in activities like movie nights, makeup, manicures, and pedicures. Although she often stayed up late, she frequently slept in until 2 p.m. the following day. Before completing elementary school, Madison befriended Anuka Stalinsky, a classmate born on July 9, 2003 in Newark. Madison and Anuka quickly became close friends. As they progressed to middle school, they expanded their circle and met Noah Sharp, a Newark native born on August 23, 2001. Noah, Madison, and Anuka often spent time together, enjoying activities such as eating ice cream or taking walks around town. Noah and Madison gradually developed feelings for each other, leading to a romantic relationship. Their teenage romance blossomed quickly, and they fell deeply in love. However, their relationship took an unexpected turn in early 2020, about a year after they began dating. Madison decided to end the relationship, leaving Noah confused, as she did not provide a clear reason for the breakup. Following their amicable separation, Noah remained heartbroken but found emotional support in Anuka, who became a trusted companion. Noah and Anuka began spending more time together and texted daily. Despite his lingering sadness, Noah started dating Anuka. However, he continued to maintain a connection with his ex-girlfriend, Madison, even visiting her on her 17th birthday with a gift. During this visit, Madison's mother noticed Noah's lingering emotional pain. Meanwhile, Anuka discovered Noah's encounter with Madison and became jealous. Noah's lingering resentment toward Madison turned into anger, and he wanted to hurt her for not sharing his pain. Overcome with jealousy and hatred, Anuka and Noah devised a plan to harm Madison. They exchanged ideas about methods and discussed ways to destroy evidence through text messages, video calls, and in-person conversations. Their communications revealed a disturbing intent to cause Madison suffering. Anuka and Noah considered several methods, including stabbing Madison in the heart with a knife. They also discussed using a handgun or a blunt object to inflict fatal injuries. However, they decided against using a handgun because of the loud noise it would make. Although Noah expressed uncertainty, they ultimately agreed to use a blunt object. During their discussions, they calculated the number of bricks they would need to weigh down Madison's body if they decided to dump her in a body of water. When doubts arose about this plan, they also considered burying Madison. Since Noah was accustomed to digging and knew where to find a shovel, this appeared to be a viable option. They eventually devised a plan they believed could not fail. Madison loved Halloween and ice cream, eagerly anticipating the celebration of her favorite holiday each year. Anuka, knowing this, used it to her advantage. On Friday, October 2, 2020, Anuka called Madison and invited her to spend the day together, using the pretext of buying ice cream to lure Madison into their trap. Madison quickly agreed to meet, as she had not spoken to her friend in a long time. She also intended to purchase a birthday present for Molly, whose birthday was in 3 days. On the day of the meeting, Madison wore black tights, denim shorts, gray boots, and a blue sweatshirt that said New Jersey. She added a unique touch to her outfit with a pair of white ghost earrings she had just bought for Halloween. At 2:44 p.m., Madison said goodbye to her family and left. They had no idea that this would be the last time they would see their daughter alive. Later that day, the Madisons began receiving abusive text messages from Madison's phone number, along with messages claiming that Madison was leaving the country. Believing it to be a prank, her father, Heather, responded with well wishes and joked that Madison had forgotten her passport, which was in a safe. However, when Heather tried calling Madison, there was no answer. Concern grew when he received no response. Since he and Anuka had plans to meet later, Heather decided to call Anuka. As soon as Anuka answered, she burst into tears. Anuka explained that Madison had had an abusive conversation with her and then exited the car near a store. Heather suggested that Anuka call Noah, but he did not answer. Frustrated, Heather asked Anuka to try contacting him again. Eventually, the three of them spoke, but they obtained no useful information. Heather decided to return home. On the way, he received several messages from Madison's friends, who had also received strange messages and wanted to know what was happening. Upon arriving home, Heather searched for any clues, but found no indication that Madison had left voluntarily. Madison's birthday money, clothes, and credit cards remained in her room. Furthermore, the messages made no sense, as Madison had no reason to run away, especially without her belongings or money. When Madison had not returned home by 8:30 p.m., Heather called 911 to report his daughter missing. Despite repeated attempts to contact others, all efforts were unsuccessful. Heather informed his parents, who were in another city, about the emergency, and they came to assist. Heather also notified Madison's father, who lives in Colorado, about her disappearance. He quickly shared the information on social media to enlist help in locating his daughter. On Saturday, October 3, 2020, authorities issued a yellow alert for Madison, a 17-year-old who had gone missing. In Delaware, this type of alert is activated when a person under the age of 18 is missing and triggers the necessary search measures. After receiving the report, police search teams, along with Madison's family and friends, began searching farms near the University of Delaware, where she was last seen. They also collaborated with the media to inform the public about the incident and requested that anyone with information come forward. At the same time, the authorities began questioning Madison's friends to gather information. Many sources indicated that Madison's ex-boyfriend, Noah, might be involved in the case. Some information revealed that he had been with Madison in the woods in Newark before she went missing. After further investigation, the police arrested Noah and questioned him for 9 hours on October 4th and 5th. During the interrogation, Noah gave conflicting statements, but insisted that he did not know what had happened to Madison. Finally, the silence was broken, shocking everyone, as the young man confessed to his horrific actions. He admitted that he had killed Madison and that Anuka had been an accomplice. When speaking to the police, Noah stated that Anuka was jealous of Madison's relationship with him. He explained that he had been deeply hurt after breaking up with Madison, which caused him to lose control. According to Noah, Anuka took Madison to the woods behind the elementary school. Noah hid behind a bush and attacked Madison with an aluminum baseball bat. Madison, unsuspecting, had been happy to spend time with her friend. Noah said he struck Madison twice in the head, and the second hit caused him to lose control and use excessive force. He then continued to hit her body several more times. After the attack, Noah and Anuka transported Madison's body in Anuka's car to a location under a bridge near the intersection of I-95 and the Delaware state line, about 15 minutes from the crime scene and close to a warehouse. Upon arriving at the site, Noah and Anuka attempted to push the body into the river but were unsuccessful. Instead, they decided to conceal the body in a shallow grave. Using detailed information from Noah, investigators thoroughly searched the designated area. There, they recovered the aluminum baseball bat used as the murder weapon, with traces of blood. Investigators also found the clothing Madison had been wearing when she left home, along with several burned items. Noah then guided police to a large wooded area near the intersection of I-95 and Delaware State Road, where he and Anuka had hidden Madison's body. On Monday, October 5, 2020, the police announced the discovery of Madison's body, shocking her family, friends, and the entire community. Days later, on Friday, October 9th, hundreds gathered at the high school football field to remember and honor Madison. An autopsy revealed that Madison died from blunt force trauma to the head. Additionally, experts found DNA from both Noah and Anuka in the physical evidence collected at the crime scene and at the location where the body was discovered. Noah faced charges of first-degree murder, possession of a deadly weapon during the commission of a crime, and first-degree conspiracy. He was committed to a correctional facility with bail set at $1 million. On Monday, November 16, 2020, more than a month after Madison's murder and following the processing of necessary evidence, 17-year-old Anuka was also arrested. She was taken into custody after a Newcastle County grand jury indicted her on charges of first-degree murder, possession of a deadly weapon during the commission of a felony, and first-degree conspiracy. Meanwhile, Madison's family remained in a state of grief. Heather repeatedly stated that a plausible reason for his daughter's death would never be found. He believes that dangerous killers should be imprisoned for life after committing such acts. Although Noah admitted to detectives that he had committed the crime, he denied it in his formal court indictment. Noah's defense argued that he was mentally unstable. Attorneys often attempt to justify their clients' actions by citing mental instability, and this case was no exception. During one of the preliminary hearings, Noah's attorney stated that Noah was being treated for schizophrenia and was under the care of a psychiatrist at the time of the murder. The attorney also claimed that Noah had suffered an injury in Chester County, Pennsylvania, approximately 3 weeks before the murder, which caused memory loss and other related issues. However, in May 2021, Anuka pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and first-degree conspiracy. Her attorneys reached a deal with prosecutors in which Anuka agreed to testify against Noah regarding his intent to end Madison's life. According to court documents, several individuals, including those close to Madison, informed police about Noah's second personality, known as his alter ego. Prosecutors, however, argued that Noah himself had disseminated this information as part of a plan to justify his actions by claiming mental illness. He spread the rumors beforehand, intending to use them in court later. After 2 long years of waiting for justice, on October 20, 2022, the trial of the defendant began in Newcastle County. During the proceedings, approximately 30 witnesses were called, most by Deputy Attorney General Matt Foley. The Newcastle County courtroom played hours of video footage of Noah's interrogation by state police detectives. Viewers heard Noah's constantly changing accounts until he finally confessed. The defense attempted to challenge this evidence, insisting that the police had interrogated their client for too long and had influenced Noah's testimony. Attorney Monica Jerome claimed that detectives manipulated the interrogation by telling Noah what to say and pressuring him. However, it was apparent that these were merely desperate attempts to justify the murder in any way possible. The prosecution presented text messages between Noah and Anuka showing that they had planned the crime. Confronted with this evidence, the defense argued that someone else might have used Noah's device and that he was not the one communicating with Anuka. Noah's mother and brother were called to testify, but their statements were inconsistent. Noah's mother, Micaiah, claimed that her son was not wet when he returned home on the evening of October 2nd. In contrast, his brother David stated that Noah was soaked and appeared as if he had been in a swamp. Micaiah later said that when Noah came home, Anuka entered calmly, whereas David described Anuka as angrily slamming the door. Prosecutor Matt Foley asked Micaiah if she had discussed the evidence against Noah with him, and she said no. However, the prosecutor played a recording of a phone call between Noah and his mother from a month before the trial. During the call, they discussed surveillance camera evidence from the elementary school. Noah told his mother that his face was not visible in the video, although he and Anuka had been near the school about an hour before Madison was killed. She reacted with relief when the video was released, showing an African-American man of Noah's height and build holding a baseball bat and walking into the woods with a girl. The defense also questioned Noah's relatives about the head injury he allegedly suffered on September 13, 2020, and an unconfirmed fall from a bicycle hours before he was questioned by police on October 4. Noah's attorney argued that these injuries could have caused dissociative amnesia, attempting to justify his statements to the police. In response, the prosecutor questioned whether the injuries were part of a plot to kill Madison, which the defense contested with some uncertainty. During the 3-hour trial, Anuka affirmed all of the prosecution's arguments. During her testimony, she calmly explained that Noah had convinced her that Madison had spoken behind her back, even though Madison's friends and family insisted that Madison had never done so. After 8 days of trial and the presentation of more than 250 pieces of evidence by the prosecutor, the jury took just 3 hours to reach a verdict. Noah Sharp was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the jury's verdict was announced, Noah and his mother displayed no emotion. Noah simply turned and smiled at his mother. Madison's family wept tears of relief before leaving the courtroom. Heather, Madison's mother, echoed her daughter's words. "Choose the light, not the dark. Love conquers all." She also expressed gratitude to her friends and family, stating that this had been a 2-year process, and they could not have done it without their continued love and support. She extended thanks to everyone, especially Newark Charter School, the Board of Trustees, and families who had supported the Love Wins 5K over the past 2 years, as well as the Madison Sparrow Memorial Scholarship, which helps support future educators. Regarding Anuka, prosecutors stated that under Delaware law, because she was a minor at the time of the crime, she faced life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Moving on to the next case. The case of Mia Morrow. Mia Morrow was born in Tinley Park, Illinois. She is the daughter of Muhammad Almaru and Audrey Jorgensen. In the spring of 2019, when she was 15 years old, her mother, Audrey, suffered a serious brain injury and required constant, round-the-clock care. She was a kind individual and always took good care of her mother, who was unable to care for herself. This responsibility caused her to mature earlier than many of her peers. At the time of the incident, she was 17 years old and a senior at Victor Andrews High School. Her family said she wanted to become a dentist specializing in oral hygiene, but she planned to attend college close to home so she could continue caring for her mother. On April 26th, Randa had a medical appointment and asked Mia to come to the house to look after Audrey. Mia was supposed to arrive at 11:30 a.m., but she never showed up. When Randa texted to ask about it, Mia replied that she had accidentally rear-ended another person's car while driving her father Almaru's vehicle. She also said she was worried that her father would scold her very harshly. Mia had earlier asked her father, Almaru, for permission to attend the prom on Friday, April 29, 2022. She told friends and family that her father had agreed to let her go to the prom and that he had even chosen her dress. However, just one day before the event, her father suddenly changed his mind and announced that he would not allow her to attend. On April 29, 2022, Linda went to the house to take care of Audrey and began using the Find iPhone feature to track Mia's phone, checking whether she went to the prom. The results showed that her phone left Tinley Park twice at different times, but it did not travel to Chicago, where the prom was being held. The following day, April 30th, Linda texted Mia but received no reply. Linda drove past her house and noticed that the curtains were closed. She reported this to the police, as Mia usually kept the curtains open. On May 1st, Linda texted Mia again, but still got no response. She then decided to call and text her sister, Randa. At around 2 p.m., the two agreed that Randa would try to persuade Almaru to give her the house key so she could check whether Mia was okay. Almaru asked Randa to keep it secret, stressing that she was the only person he trusted. Later that afternoon, when Randa arrived at Almaru's house, he opened the door appearing quite disheveled. He asked her to sit with Audrey while he handled some paperwork. Shortly afterward, she began hearing strange noises coming from the bedroom. When she went inside, she saw Mia lying on the floor, covered with a blanket. Almaru was lying next to Mia with his arm around the young girl. Panicking, she immediately called the police to report what she had seen. Soon after, police arrived at the scene. They found Mia dead in the bedroom of the house. An autopsy revealed that she had multiple bruises, including on her head, arms, legs, and feet. Her death was ruled a homicide. Additionally, she suffered from hemorrhaging and brain damage. Almaru was found lying next to her body. He had cut his wrists and throat in an attempt to take his own life, but he survived. He was then transported to a nearby hospital and is currently receiving treatment. While searching the scene, police discovered a box cutter, a curved metal bar in the kitchen, and a pestle, all stained with Mia's blood and hair. In addition, a rubber hammer was found in the garage, along with a tarp and a rubber strap inside the house. Evidence at the scene indicated that Mia had been violently beaten with the metal bar and rubber hammer. Police also recovered a letter written by Almaru to his son on the day of the incident. In the letter, he explained that after checking Mia's phone, he suspected she was hiding something, so he beat her to obtain information. He admitted to losing his temper, losing control of himself, and violently striking Mia, which caused her to suffer a head injury. After hitting her, he lay beside her and lost consciousness. When he regained consciousness, he realized that her body was cold. After Almaru recovered, investigators questioned him. During the interrogation, he admitted to attacking his daughter Mia following an argument about whether she would attend the prom. However, he claimed that Mia's death was an accident. He also texted his son, admitting to the violence and expressing anger, while still insisting that the death was not intentional. These statements, along with the evidence, led to his arrest. On Friday, August 16, 2024, a preliminary hearing was held in Cook County, Illinois. At the hearing, several witnesses, including family members, testified that Mia had expressed concerns about being beaten by her father, Almaru, before her death. She also shared her fears with a relative, stating that she was afraid her father might beat or even kill her. These testimonies played a crucial role in clarifying Almaru's actions before the incident. The prosecutor detailed the attack, explaining that Almaru used a metal bat and a rubber hammer to beat his daughter, Mia, to death. An autopsy determined that she suffered severe trauma that caused her death. Text messages from Almaru to his son, in which he admitted that he had lost control, were also presented as evidence. Prosecutors argued that Almaru's actions were intentional and driven by anger following an argument over her attendance at the prom. Initially, he agreed to let her go, but later changed his mind, saying he did not trust her. Almaru's attorney, however, attempted to reduce the charges, arguing that it was an impulsive act and that there was no intent to kill. After reviewing witness testimony, along with the evidence and arguments from the prosecution, the jury took approximately 1 hour to reach a verdict. They found Muhammad Almaru, 42, guilty of first-degree murder of his daughter, Mia Mero. 2 months later, on Monday, October 7, 2024, the Cook County District Court in Illinois, United States, held a sentencing hearing for Muhammad Almaru. The court determined that Almaru's actions were intentional and warranted severe punishment, resulting in a lengthy prison sentence. He was sentenced by a judge to 55 years in prison for the beating death of his 17-year-old daughter, Mia Mero. He will receive credit for the 2 years he spent in detention, but he will still be required to serve 100% of his sentence. This means he will be 97 years old before becoming eligible for parole. After the sentencing, Almaru's defense attorney requested a new trial and asked the judge to consider a reduced sentence, but both requests were denied. Moving on to the next case. The incredible case of Michelle Whitaker. Michelle Laurel Whitaker was born on August 16, 1969, as the fourth of 5 children to her parents. According to her mother, Laura Andrews, Michelle was extremely close to her entire family. However, this changed when they moved from Illinois to Gastonia, North Carolina, and Michelle's once happy demeanor began to fade. As she entered her teenage years, Michelle and her mother frequently clashed, primarily due to her mother's strictness. After graduating from high school, Michelle married, but the union lasted less than a year. Her inexperience and youth made it difficult for her to handle the problems created by her partner. The abusive treatment by her husband marked the beginning of a prolonged and distressing period in Michelle's life. Those close to her believe this tumultuous time contributed to her later struggles. At that time, she struggled to cope and made poor decisions as a result. After her divorce, Michelle's family moved to Spartanburg, South Carolina. By the age of 30, Michelle was grappling with alcohol addiction and had already experienced 3 failed marriages. She worked part-time as a waitress and was barely getting by. One evening in 1999, Michelle met a man named David after her shift ended, and he offered to give her a ride home. Michelle accepted, but soon regretted her decision. Instead of taking her home, David drove her to a secluded area where he assaulted her and forced her into intimate contact. He was arrested a year later, pleaded guilty to assault and battery, and received an 8-year prison sentence. Just before she disappeared, Michelle was arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol. Her parents decided it was time to take drastic measures. They contacted the police and requested that Michelle be held in custody until a spot in a rehabilitation center became available. Although it was a difficult decision, her parents felt it was the only way to help Michelle in her situation. However, Michelle became extremely upset, and from that point onward, her relationship with her mother deteriorated significantly. Unfortunately, Michelle was mistakenly released from jail without receiving the court-ordered treatment for her substance and alcohol abuse. On August 5, 2002, Michelle had an argument with her mother and stormed out of the house in a bad mood. 3 days later, the man she had been staying with contacted her mother, Laura Andrews, to report that he could not find Michelle after they had argued. This was how Laura learned of her daughter's disappearance. Laura immediately sought assistance from a friend who worked at the local police station, but the police, familiar with Michelle's lifestyle, advised her to wait a little longer, assuring her that Michelle would likely return on her own. However, 2 weeks passed, and Michelle did not come back. On August 21, 2002, Laura filed an official missing persons report, and local law enforcement began investigating Michelle Whitaker's disappearance. During the investigation, authorities discovered the last place Michelle had been seen, a truck stop. This information came from a local resident named Doug, who had encountered Michelle by chance on the street the day before she disappeared. Doug recounted that he had stopped his motorcycle outside a bar where Michelle was sitting and struck up a conversation with her. Michelle told him she had had a fight with her boyfriend, who had thrown her out of the house. Later that evening, they visited 2 bars together, playing a few games of billiards at one of them. They then rode on Doug's motorcycle until dawn, after which they went to his house. Thus, it was revealed that Michelle Whitaker had spent her final evening visiting local bars, and Doug was the last person to see her alive. This made Doug the prime suspect in Michelle's disappearance. According to his testimony, Michelle had planned to travel to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, a resort city on the Atlantic coast, where she hoped to earn money working in local bars and restaurants. Doug claimed that he dropped Michelle off at a truck stop, but only after giving her some clothes, including a t-shirt and shorts, as well as money to buy coffee and newspapers. He said he wished her good luck before leaving. To verify Doug's account, the police administered a lie detector test, which he passed. Authorities also tested the man Michelle had been staying with before her disappearance, but found no evidence suggesting his involvement. The police began considering the possibility that Michelle had indeed gone to Myrtle Beach, which is roughly 250 miles from Spartanburg. A few more weeks passed, but there was still no sign of Michelle. Her family and friends grew increasingly anxious. Despite her anger and resentment toward her parents, they could not believe she would abandon her family and go into hiding. Michelle's extended disappearance caused the local sheriff to question her motives. When people travel for long periods, they usually take personal belongings with them, but Michelle had left with almost nothing. Moreover, she had a beloved pet dog to which she was deeply attached. Every detective interviewed agreed that Michelle would never willingly abandon her dog. In the meantime, Michelle's parents began driving around the neighborhood, hoping to find any clue that might lead them to their daughter. After receiving multiple tips that Michelle had been spotted on a beach in North Carolina, they went there immediately. They spent 3 days searching for her, posting flyers and talking to locals, but their efforts ultimately proved fruitless. After 6 months of unsuccessful searching, Laura Andrews began questioning whether her behavior toward her daughter had been appropriate. She had witnessed her daughter's downward spiral and could not stand by without acting. Laura wanted to protect her in any way possible. Additionally, she suspected that the brutal attack Michelle suffered in 1999 might have contributed to her disappearance. Laura could not forgive herself for the hurtful words she had spoken to Michelle after the assault, even though the attack had been a terrible act committed by a stranger. Laura had initially blamed Michelle for taking a destructive path and causing harm to herself, which further damaged Michelle's self-esteem. From the sheriff's office, it was assumed that Michelle might have had reasons to escape due to her reputation. Detectives believed she might eventually be found, but a year passed with no results. Police were alarmed that Michelle had left no digital traces, which they considered a bad sign. Both authorities and her family wondered whether Michelle had become a victim of a crime, possibly falling prey to a truck driver. However, this theory remained unconfirmed. 2 more years passed with no leads. On the 3rd anniversary of Michelle's disappearance, after police and Laura Andrews visited the truck stop where Michelle was last seen, local TV stations revisited the story. Just days after the story aired on the news, the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office received a strange letter. The anonymous, handwritten note, written on a small sheet of paper, claimed to reveal the location of Michelle Whitaker's body. A crude, homemade map accompanied the letter, marking the exact location. Despite its amateurish appearance, the letter was well written and properly constructed, lending it an air of credibility. The sheriff, accompanied by search dogs, began a search of a rural area 25 miles from where Michelle had last been seen. This development occurred 3 years after her disappearance, leaving her family torn between despair and hope. Some had reluctantly accepted that Michelle might be dead, while others clung to the possibility that she was alive and safe. The search dogs were unable to detect any scent, and the operation was eventually called off. Although investigators were relieved that no one was found, they remained puzzled by the letter. Handwriting analysis and DNA evidence from the envelope suggested that the author was a woman, but her identity remained unknown. In 2006, Michelle's parents relocated to Rock Hill, South Carolina, approximately 65 miles from Spartanburg. A year later, on the 5th anniversary of Michelle's disappearance, the family gathered at their church. Michelle's mother, Laura Andrews, did not want the gathering to be treated as a memorial service because Michelle's body had not been found, and there remained a faint hope that she might still be alive. Another year passed, and Detective William Gary took over the investigation of Michelle's disappearance. At the time, He was handling a dozen unsolved cases, including Michelle's. Since many years had passed without any evidence that Michelle was alive, her case was treated as a felony. The lack of evidence led investigators to believe that something tragic had likely occurred. As the 6th anniversary of Michelle's disappearance approached on August 4, 2008, Detective Gary received a call from a woman claiming to know Michelle's whereabouts. She stated that Michelle was living in Oregon. The woman had seen Michelle's file on an episode of Forensic Files and on a website created by Laura, which helped her recognize Michelle as someone who had been living with friends for 6 years, unaware that her family had been searching for her. After receiving the mysterious tip, investigators were understandably cautious. Detective Gary requested that the woman provide a photo of Michelle as evidence. He then showed the picture to Detective Wood, who had previously worked on the case, and immediately recognized her. An Oregon State police officer was promptly dispatched to the address in question to confirm Michelle's identity. In a remarkable coincidence, on August 5, 2008, exactly 6 years after Michelle's argument with her mother and her departure from home, Detective Laura Andrews received a call informing her that her daughter had been found alive. Laura struggled to process the news, and only after hanging up the phone did a flood of questions arise. Where is she? How is she? What had she been doing all this time? Although the news was welcome, a family reunion was not immediately possible. The police were required to respect Michelle's privacy and could not disclose her location to her parents. It was up to Michelle to initiate contact with her family. Detectives attempted to persuade Michelle to speak with her relatives, if only to ease their concerns. The following evening, Michelle called her mother. 2 weeks later, at Atlanta Airport, Michelle and her family shared a long-overdue reunion. She confessed that she was exhausted from her former way of life. After her argument with her mother, Michelle came to a realization. She believed that her family would be better off without her presence. At first, when Doug dropped her off at the truck stop, Michelle intended to go to Myrtle Beach to look for work. However, instead she hitchhiked and eventually ended up in Las Vegas, then California, and later Oregon. Michelle apologized to both her family and the police, who had spent significant time and resources searching for her over the previous 6 years. She had been living under her real name, and it never crossed her mind that anyone was still searching for her. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.